Well, as we examine the state of the republic from inside the Beltway, or the swamp as it's come to be called in the era of Donald Trump, the current debate over illegal immigration provides an excellent framework for where the two bitterly divided sides of the political aisle are coming from. If you clear away the smoke and remove the mirrors from the hot debate over illegal immigration, the bottom line assertion of the left is that enforcement of laws duly passed by Congress is immoral. And oh, by the way, the actual fulfillment of a signature campaign promise is also immoral. Knowing they don't have the votes to change the law, they didn't even have the votes when Barack Obama was president, and they controlled the House and Senate, the left has resorted to saying that actually enforcing the laws duly passed by Congress is immoral and somehow illegal. Do you think a generation's worth of neglect on illegal immigration can be reversed without some eggs getting cracked, as it's called in Washington? If this was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. But just as with the foreign policy equivalent of this issue, Korea, Trump did not cause this mess. He inherited 11 million or more illegal immigrants, a border far too porous, and enforcement of laws far too lax because of the combined interest in votes for the socialists and cheap labor for the capitalists, all at the expense of a culture we refuse to defend, which rots from the inside more with each passing year. Now, the other immorality on the left is for a conservative candidate to actually do what he promised. This is also immoral because, well, it just is. Obama promised national health care and delivered it as he was expected to when the voters elected him. This was noble and righteous. But when Trump promised to build a wall and enforce the nation's immigration laws and was elected on that promise, the left claims the voters were duped, or they didn't really mean it, or they now realize they made a mistake and regret voting for Donald Trump, or the election actually was stolen by Vladimir Putin and his gang of Russian trolls and bots, and thus every action taken by President Trump or his administration is illegitimate. But while enforcing the law and fulfilling a signature campaign promise are now considered immoral by the left, here is the flip side, the things they do not consider immoral. Openly defying federal law and creating illegal sanctuary cities. Defending the honor of illegal immigrant gang members who use, among other instruments of murder, machetes to execute their victims. Shutting down practitioners of free speech in academia, calling those who disagree with them fascists, threatening and intimidating members of the president's administration as they attempt to simply dine in peace, and whipping a crowd into a frenzy by demanding they carry on their resistance not just to this president, but to civilized behavior itself. Nope, none of that is immoral. Only the actual enforcement of the laws that are on the books and the fulfillment of an unambiguous campaign promise are immoral because Trump is president. So normal modes of operation, civility, and truth are out the window because this president represents such a moral threat to the republic that he must be stopped by whatever means present themselves or can be concocted out of whole cloth, no matter whether they are unethical, illegal, or unconstitutional. And then there are those traitorous never-Trump conservatives and Republicans who continue to twist themselves into pretzels condemning this president, talking down the very tax cuts they have favored for their entire lives, and the roaring economy, and the ever-brightening employment picture, and the massive deregulation, and the breakthroughs on North Korea, and the Supreme Court justices, one and soon two, and federal judges appointed by this president they know full well are crucial to steering the nation on a constitutional path. Never mind that, these never-Trumpers say. The man is vulgar and therefore must be condemned, even if it means electing a Democrat-controlled Congress. I mean, George Will, Mr. Conservative and de facto flagship of the never-Trump movement these days, actually wrote a piece in the Washington Post recently, which was headlined, vote against the GOP this November, mocking Republicans who actually support their own president's agenda and actively promoting a Democrat majority in the House that would stymie everything Trump tries to do. And in explaining away the one thing that everybody agreed would be the most important thing Trump can do, George Will concluded by making the weakest of arguments, that the Supreme Court is not really as important as the Congress or president. Really? That's the best argument he can make? Has he actually been paying attention to the game-changing decisions issued by the nation's highest court in just the last week? Decisions that will affect the country long past the time Donald Trump leaves the White House. This is the effect Trump has had on those who personally detest him. In George Will's case, most likely because Trump shook up Mr. Will's comfortable little world inside the D.C. swamp, where he attends those A-list dinner parties and writes soaring philosophical screeds promoting lofty ideals like he's in a debating society, unaffected by whether anything he writes would actually be implemented. And then along comes Trump, spares the nation not just from Hillary Clinton, but most likely an irreversible descent into Barack Obama's fundamentally transformed nation. He crushes the Clinton dynasty, saves the Supreme Court from a progressive majority for a generation, lowers taxes, increases job numbers to near full employment, obliterates federal regulations. The economy is roaring down the tracks. And yet never-Trumpers like George Will, who should be on their knees in gratitude to Donald Trump for simply defeating Hillary Clinton, if nothing else, continue to look that gift horse straight in the mouth and spout only words of bitter condemnation about the 45th president. Meanwhile, other never-Trump Republicans, addled by a hatred for Trump just as deranged as the left, or perhaps even more so, given that unlike the left, Trump's ideology is not the issue, they continue to rail on against the president, pronounced conservatives like Bill Kristol and David Frum, over-the-hill GOP strategists like Anna Navarro and Steve Schmidt on MSNBC, who've gone on untamed verbal rampages calling Trump a Nazi and worse, if that's even possible. Shutting down and shouting down, that is all the left and never-Trump Republicans and conservatives have, as they desperately seek to preserve their diminishing station in life at all costs. And what the rank and file, average, ordinary, normal, hardworking people of this country voted for, be damned. What they really hate is that Trump is willing to say on the record what they say privately, behind closed doors, in cloakrooms, in fancy restaurants inside the swamp. Take the whole dust-up over when the president supposedly said the thing about the S-hole countries in a meeting. Trump haters went into a virtue-signaling rage. But how many of these outraged souls have said essentially the same thing in private? Only no one reports that. How many of the outraged and offended souls don't say the same things about their political opponents and enemies in private that Trump sends out on Twitter? How many of these people are saying the same things about Trump supporters as Peter Strzok, the key FBI investigator who said Trump supporters are hillbillies who smell? Trump is willing to call things as he sees them because, unlike all his critics, opponents, and enemies, he isn't owned by anyone. He was already wealthier than God and already one of the world's most powerful men before he ever ran for president. And it kills them that he can get away with saying and doing what he's done, spoken the people's truth to their power, toppled their establishment with the most stunning political upset in recorded history, and seen his approval among the American people rise to its highest perch with midterm elections approaching. The left will never, ever be convinced that Donald Trump's election was legitimate. They remain convinced that the American people could never elect this guy unless something was not on the level. It's killing the left, and it's killing the never-Trump conservatives who have discarded all of their principles in a psychotic break brought on by the still rampant Trump derangement syndrome. So here we are, approaching 40% of the way through Trump's first term, and he remains as president every bit the lightning rod he was during the unforgettable campaign of 2016. But he is also exactly the game-changing historical figure he promised to be, for better or worse. And the desperate wailing of a vanquished political establishment and the disloyal opposition willing to burn down the Constitution to run him out of the White House will ultimately serve to simply confirm the very reasons why the voters elected Trump in the first place.